Hello, my name is Dallas Eggers. I am the president of the Prescott Area Historical Society. And today it is my pleasure to interview one of my mentors. Mentor is one of those who inspires you. And the people I have been inspired by, one of them sitting right next to me, her name is Mary Cotter Beeler. She's a local historian, she is a researcher, she is an author, and she's a great mom. And so today we are going to interview Mary Cotter Beeler, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her background and that. So, Mary, go to it.
Okay, Dallas. I have to laugh that I'm referred to as a local historian. I'm old enough to know most of the stuff about Prescott that everybody else has died. But anyway, I was born down in a little community called Grange Hall near Plum City, Wisconsin. Lived there till I was about 4 years old. We moved from there in 1935. My parents were John Cotter and Lillian Norris Cotter. And my father was working on a farm down there, but he just did not like farming. So we moved up to Prescott, and I think mainly because my mother had gone to River Falls College and got a 2-year degree as a teacher, and she did not want us kids, my brother Terrence and myself, to going to country school. So we moved up here to Prescott, and they have lived here ever since. Both, of course, deceased now. And I have many younger brothers, but my brother Terrence and I were the only ones that were close together, and my other brothers, Michael and Steve and Al and John, are all strung out. So I was really close only to my brother Terrence, who has just mainly died. And my memories of Prescott when we moved here, I can remember the street, the population sign was 811 people. So you knew everybody in town almost. There was just a few kids your own age to play with, but we played with whoever we played with. And we had a black family in town, and they were all welcomed in town. One of my good friends was Margie Cook. And so we just, it was a very nice town to be in. And the beach was the biggest place we went to in the summertime. Everybody went to the beach in the summertime. And we went out to the tourist park, especially after we had bicycles. Then it's now Freedom Park, of course. And they had pretty much the same churches as they have now, except that Joy Lutheran was not in existence. But I was with my grandmother Granny Norris quite a bit, and I used to go to the Methodist church with her. But of course I have been a lifelong member of the Catholic Church. And the reason I got started interested in history is when I was 14 years old, I answered an ad in the Prescott paper that they wanted somebody to come and work there. And I answered the ad. I was 14. And ahead of me was one of the older boys, and I thought, well, heck, I don't even have a chance to go because he's older, they'll hire him. Well, wonder of wonders, they hired me. And the editor of the paper was W.H. Hansen, and he was very much a gentleman. When he sat me down at the linotype, this huge big machine, he had a spittoon alongside of the machine, and the first thing he did when he saw me sitting down there, he moved that out of the way. And the reason I got interested in history, I should say too, that when I asked Prof. Malone, DJ Malone, the principal, if I could go down and work early days if I was all through with my classes. And he said, go right ahead. He said, if you're done at 2 o'clock, you can go down because you'll probably learn more there than you will at school. And he was right, I did. And there was a gentleman named George Cook that used to come into the journal office, and he would talk. He had lived in Prescott all his life. He was a little old gentleman that really kind of smelled awfully bad because he was a bachelor, and I don't think he took care of himself. But he knew all kinds of things about Prescott. And I started writing them down because I thought, this is really interesting things that he's telling me. And that was how I got really started in Prescott history. And that was how I happened to write this first book right when I was out of high school. So I give him credit for my interest in history.
Mary, a question. Was George black?
No,
Okay.
he was not.
There was another George Cook in town, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah, because he was a friend of my grandfather
yes.
that I met when I was like 2 years old. That
Right.
sounded about the right year,
Right.
two to
There
four.
was one black family in town. It was Margie was one of my friends, and Harry and Willie.
And Mr. Cook, I didn't know him as black, pink, white, green, or yellow. He was just Grandpa's friend.
Yeah, he was
and that's all
Mr. Cook.
about- Questions about the beach, though. The beach as we know it, did it have the diving board when you were there? That wonderful diving board that we had for decades. You could
Yeah,
swim on.
we could, of course, I was too young to swim out there. I did not learn to swim very well. But they did have, you could swim out to the diving board. I don't even think they've got that now.
No.
But
No.
they did, and of course, the bigger kids, they knew how to dive, but that was the place where we all went in the summertime,
Did they have-
down to the beach.
Did they have lifeguards?
I think they did, but I don't really remember when we were young kids.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Because the beach has been a prominent feature of Prescott for
Yes, it has.
since we started.
Yes, it has.
Now, a question about the beach. Was that the beginning of the ice road? Did the ice road come down across the beach and then out onto the ice sheet?
That's right.
Okay.
You could go down next to the beach where that house is and go across the ice and go over to Hastings, wherever you wanted to go.
Now, they didn't use that because the bridge, I mean, it was used before 1923 when the bridge opened, or 22, but it was still accessible. There were still people using it even when I was a kid.
Oh, sure, because you didn't have to pay toll.
Oh.
See, we had a toll bridge in town where you had to pay money to go across.
I remember somebody asking the city to stop people from using the ice road so they'd have to pay the toll, so the Prescott Bridge Company would. I just ran into that a few months ago.
That's
that they
right.
tried to get them to stop. A, you couldn't walk across the railroad bridge, and B, they didn't want them to be able to use the ice road in the wintertime because it was going to cut into the profits of the Prescott Bridge Company. All right.
And I remember when, after we did get a car, and we'd go, us kids would duck down in the back seat so they wouldn't see us and we wouldn't have to pay the toll, but they didn't charge us anyway.
The school has been pretty important in your entire life, all the schools in town. What were the most important things that you got from our school as a student? And then what have our schools done for our community that you have seen?
Well, of course, the schools are the biggest part of the community. When I was in school, I started first grade here right after the school had burned down, and they built a brand new school, and I started in that brand new school. The kids that were 2 grades ahead of me had been going to school in the basement of the churches. But I started, there were 7 kids in our first grade, and we were still in touch through all the years, and one of them, my best friend, Dorothy Leesman Wetterlin, I'm still in touch with her. We've been friends ever since first grade. And Ruth Hambrick was our PE teacher, and she always had a little store in the school, and that's how we learned math, was we had to find out the prices of the articles we wanted to buy. And she always took pictures of all of us. She would take a group picture, and then she would take a single picture of each one of the 7 kids in her first grade. And she was a teacher here for many, many, many years.
And now at that time, only the kids from town went to school,
That's right. There were no country kids here.
They all went to the country schools yet.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And then when I graduated, the original 7 were still with us, and we graduated with 20 kids, 10 boys and 10 girls in 1948. But I think the schools have expanded tremendously, and I've always felt that we have had good teachers in our schools. And then, of course, the Catholics started a parochial school when my kids were eligible to go to school, so they went there. But I still think that the teachers in Prescott have been very good teachers throughout the years, and the community has always been back to schools. They've voted for new schools when we needed it, and they have been, they're probably one of the biggest, um, um, probably the most people hired in school, in town have been at the school. I don't know what the statistics are, do you?
No, but there was a time that nearly every teacher lived in town. None of them lived out of town.
Yeah.
They didn't live in Hudson or Plum
Yeah.
City or any of these things like they do now. They lived here.
Yeah.
And as the roads improved, the cars got better, then they could move farther away. Say, a couple questions about the St. Joe's School. What year did it open? Do you remember that? Early 60s?
Right offhand, I don't. I know Sarah went to the public school the first couple of years, and then the school was built, so she transferred over there,
So 61, 62, 63,
somewhere around
somewhere
in there. And they started like with about 125 children, and there's 100 in there today. And it's only the first through the sixth grade, and they work back and forth very well with the public school. I think they do a good job of back and forth with the schools. There's no division between you go to this school and I go to that school, you know.
St. Joe's to me has some unusual memories. Is that before they built the gymnasium on it and the food thing, there was a little basketball court and a playground behind it. It had a tetherball up there, and we would run over there after school and play basketball. And some of the best street basketball ever played in Prescott was played on the St. Joseph School playground with Pete Hermanson and Mike Johnson and these guys coming in there. And, that's some of my memories. You know, I was 2, 3, 4 years younger than them, and I'd get in there to play, and I was completely overmatched. But I can remember sitting up on top and watching down in there because it had concrete walls all around it. And it was the place to play street basketball in Prescott, was the St. Joe's playground. All right, go ahead, Mary.
And what started you writing your first book? And well, I had all this information from George Cook, and I thought, I always like to write anyway, so I thought I might as well put this all together so that history isn't lost. And so that's what started that. And when I started working at the Journal, I worked on this great big huge machine called the Linotype. And I set all the type for that book over at Graphic Design in Hastings. And there was a man that worked at the Journal office, and he drew the cover of it for me also. And I think I used to sell it for $5 maybe. But anyway, there's still a few of them around. And,
I own a couple.
Pardon?
I own 2, I think. This one and
you have 2?
the old raggedy copy that I read all the time.
Yeah. And then the next book that we started on was Dorothy Algren and I. We had she said, Mary, you've got all this information on Prescott. Why don't you get it into a book? And I thought, well, why not? So she's the one that made me start working on it, and many of the stories that I wrote in the Prescott Journal are in that book about the people, like Ollie Tronier working on the railroad, and my in-laws working on the river. And then she looked up all the family information of all the families in the paper, in the book. So it really was a joint effort between the two of us. I did all the historical writing, and she did all the autobiography writing for all the people. And it sold very well. We sold the first 500 copies the first year, and then we printed another 500, and we are now printing the third printing of that book. So it sold very well.
How long did it take you to do the research and to write it? How many years?
I think we spent about 6 years on it, off and on. And
where did you travel? Where did you travel to do some of your research?
well, we went down to Madison, and Dorothy went to Madison by herself a couple times to look up things she wanted to find out. But most of it that I had already done in the newspaper, and I just went over that and expanded that a little bit. But it took us quite a while. And when we started, neither one of us even had a computer. So, and then rounding up all the pictures and for that, but graphic design was a great help for us in doing that book.
The book we're talking about, folks, is this one, and there's very few left for sale. The next printing is kind of in process, and we hope to have that wrapped up in a few months. Even a reprint is more difficult than you would think, I'm finding out.
Yes.
And
yes.
Mary's first book is this little one that we show here. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, Mary, was who did the graphics and the artwork for this? Because it's very well done.
Graphic design in Hastings.
Yeah,
I used to help out on the linotype machine over at Hastings Gazette when they got behind. And I got very well acquainted with Tom Kranz. And he and I have been friends for a long time. In fact, I think he's still there helping you on the book now.
He's still helping me with books and signs for the baseball field, and Tom is quite a character, and I say that in a good way.
Yes.
He's interested, curious, intelligent, and one of the nicest people we'd ever meet.
Yeah, he is. So he's been a big help on that book.
What business do you miss the most? Businesses.
All of them. When I grew up, you could buy anything in Prescott. You could buy shoes and clothes. We had movies at least twice a week, and you could buy anything you wanted to in Prescott. Now you can't buy a doggone thing except groceries and beer and liquor. You can't buy any clothing. You can't buy any shoes. You can't even buy thread in town. So it's really gone hill as far as the businesses have gone. We have to go to Hastings for anything we need. And but that's the way things go, you know.
As the roads improve and transportation improved and people's cars become more dependable,
Oh, sure.
their range expanded.
When I grew up, we didn't even have a car till I was in high school. And of course, that's why you couldn't go any place anyway. If you went to St. Paul for a shopping trip, you had to go on the train.
Oh.
The train left here about 6 o'clock in the morning and got back to town about 7 o'clock at night. So I know with two of the Eaton girls and Margie Carish are some of my best friends then, and we would all four stay down at Eaton's house to get up early enough to go on the train. And of course we'd get to the city before any of the stores were open, so we'd wander around for a while. But in those days, you could buy a nice blouse for 99 cents. Then we always thought it was a big deal to go to the Chinese restaurant in town, because we didn't have any in town.
Do you remember what you paid for a ticket, for a round-trip ticket on that train?
I really don't. I don't. It couldn't have been very much at all.
Well, I know I'm a little younger than you are. I'm as old as your oldest daughter.
Slightly.
and so I remember riding to the train myself, and at that time it was $1.25 round trip. And when you got into St. Paul, your ticket was good for a half an hour on any bus or trolley in the city. And so I remember as a kid watching the people walk down the hill to get on the train to go to work.
Yeah.
You know, and now everybody drives.
Yeah.
Almost everybody drives.
Yeah, the trains quit going a long time ago. But the cars have changed Prescott a lot. When the cars first came out, not very many people had cars, and that's what kept Prescott as a community to itself. And after the cars came out, then we were dependent on other communities.
What new businesses that we have now or have gained in the last 20, 30 years do you think have been the most positive things?
Well, of course, neither one of them are in business now, but Jake Seed Company started in the 1930s, and I think everybody in town worked at Jake Seed Company once, sometime in their life, but of course they had sold out several years ago. And the other business that started in town was the hospital. We actually had a hospital in the 1930s, the early 1930s. And of course that is gone now, but several of my children were born in that hospital until that closed. So those are the two businesses that made a change in the community, but they are not in business anymore.
You know, when you mention movies, Prescott, of course, does not have a movie house now. Where was the movie house?
The movie house was where the vacant lot is now, overlooking the St. Croix River. And then it turned into the Steamboat Inn. That was the former movie house.
So the building that was the theater was converted to the Steamboat.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. But we had movies at least twice a week, if not 3 times a week.
Now, who ran the theater?
Iona Hammond and Jerry Reichert bought it after a while, and I don't remember who the first people were that ran the theater.
All right, I got to ask you a tough one here. What movie do you remember watching at that theater?
Oh, let's see. I know we watched The Wizard of Oz.
Oh,
I don't know how many times. And the one about the Civil War. What was that one?
I was going to say for me, it was going to Hastings, and the first movie I ever saw was Bambi.
Oh,
So, and I hear tell that there was a movie theater prior to that in town in the early 1900s that would be in the old J. Bean building, and somebody came to town with a sheet. You know anything about that? And he brought a projector and a sheet and showed movies on Saturday night.
yeah, that's right, up against the walls of the buildings, and everybody just sat in their cars or sat on the street and watched the movies.
And did he charge you when you sat in the car? Did
Well,
they
heck
come
no, there was no charge.
No.
And I don't think the movies could have cost very much because most of us could afford to go to all of them that came. But, so that was one thing that we had, and we had one big restaurant too that the people had their own children, and boy, we could all go to that restaurant. We didn't have to sit there for a half an hour and then look at you like you wanted to leave. You could sit there and visit with your friends all evening long, and you might have just had a hamburger and a Coke or something. But that was kind of a gathering place for us.
Now, where was that one?
That one was downtown by where, right next to the store on the corner where, I don't know what's in there now. I really don't.
Isn't where the lawyer is it?
No, it's on the other side of the street.
That's not what used to be Most Pharmacy and the Sweet
No, it's
Kitchen.
on the other street.
Okay,
Yeah, I can't even think what's in there now.
I know.
I know it used to be Brandeville and Betzel's grocery store on the corner,
Oh,
but I don't know what. I'm
The
not
little-
downtown enough to know what's there when I
well,
work
the little
downtown.
one next door now, actually.
It's the bar.
No, there's the one on the corner, then there's the one, and it's actually a beauty shop now. And then the bar is next to that. There's that little one in the middle there. And I think that we have a picture of Helen Sunby running a restaurant downtown.
Well, that was the same one then too.
Okay, that's
What's
what I
the
was
bar next to it?
The Broad Street. And it
Yeah.
used to be the Vets Club. Used to
Yeah,
be the Vets
that's
Club.
right, that's
Well, we
what
have
it
a
is.
picture of Helen Sunby's, and I almost guarantee that it's Ken Lee sitting in his car laughing, him and 3 boys sitting outside there, and
Yeah.
you can see Helen's their head out the door. Chuck showed me that picture not too long ago.
Yeah.
But what other businesses that you think have really been a benefit to us?
Well, of course, the bars are the benefit now. I mean, they bring in a tremendous amount of people. You go downtown on almost any night in the week, and the cars are lining both sides of the streets. We do have an antique store downtown, but most of them are the bars or restaurants. And there's some little businesses in some of the stores, but I don't know what they are.
You and I, as historians, we know that bridges are always a focus of history. And you've been through a few bridges. You've been through a couple 3-car bridges and a couple 3 railroad bridges, and you didn't see the ferry.
No.
But what do you know about bridges? What goofy things or strange things do you remember happening on our bridges?
Well,
And you mentioned it was a toll bridge.
yes, it was a toll bridge, and they sold stock to people in town for the toll bridges. And I have the #1 stock that my father-in-law, George Beeler, brought. And then he sold it again to somebody, and it's hanging on my wall right now. And the people that bought stock and held on to it made money on that stock. They made quite a bit of money, in fact, because it wasn't left off the toll until what year I don't remember. You could look all that
It
up.
seems like it's 1946.
Somewhere around in there, I think.
Does that sound right?
Yeah. And then, of course, the railroad bridge, when the water was so high, I believe in 1965 maybe,
Yep.
the only way we could get out of town was to walk on the railroad bridge, and we had to have a car parked on the other side so we could keep on going on the road. You could not get out of town by car. So, and I always, if I worked late at Hastings, I always waited till the night shift at 3 m was over so I could have somebody walk across the railroad bridge with me because I was afraid of the rats on the bridge. And of course the railroad people discouraged it, but that was the only way people could get out of town, was on the railroad bridge.
I remember Dad going to work, and walking across the railroad bridge to go to 3M.
Yeah, that's right. You had to have a car parked over there so you could get there.
In the car bridge, it was interesting because you and I drove across it thousands of times. People were terrified of our bridge. They would come to that bridge and they wouldn't drive across it. And it was, so, you remember any unusual occurrences on our car bridge?
Well, I know several times, it was a lift bridge when the towboats went through. Of course, the towboats had the right of way on the river. If there was a towboat going up the river, they had to stop traffic so the bridge would open up the car bridge. It was a lift bridge. And sometimes they couldn't get the bridge back down. And that was quite a challenge because the operator had to come and fiddle around and try to get the bridge back down on the road where it belonged.
And the bridge was what you would call an attractive nuisance for the kids, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Jumping off here and jumping off there and climbing up to the wheels and jumping off and these types of things.
Right.
Now you think, how do we ever live this long? The car bridge had, for me, I remember getting hit by a towboat once. And he hit it so hard that he knocked it out of square, and they had to get some big hydraulic equipment from the county or the state to actually jack the bridge piers back in alignment so that they could get it closed because the towboat had hit it and knocked it out of whack.
Right.
That was that pilot's last trip up the St. Croix River.
I think so.
After that, they put him on the Minnesota River where it's just mud banks and willows.
Yeah, that's true.
The Beeler family's had a long history in the railroad business. I know you've had two sons, deckhands, pilots, and this type of thing. What do you remember about the river business, which is you saw it at its peak, you've watched it for 70, 80 years. I mean, what do you see that the river has changed? What has it done for our town?
Well, back in the old days, there were pilots. In fact, I think there's statistics that, according to the population, Prescott had the biggest statistic of licensed pilots for the size of the town, the size of the town. And I know the Beelers were pretty much part of that. And I know my husband got a pilot's license when you had to completely draw the entire river, every single thing on that river. And I still have the books that he used to draw the river. And one of my sons was on the river, but I don't think it's quite as important as it was. I don't think there are that many people on the river now, although for the History Center downtown, we are turning the back room into a river room, and we're having the licenses of all the pilots. We're having the names of all the people who worked on the river. Many of them were young guys. When they were in high school, they'd go to work in the summertime on the river because it was always a job as a deckhand. So we are very conscious of Prescott's history according to the river, and we're trying to make people more aware of that now, is what an important thing it was for the town to be on the Mississippi River.
Well, we were the entrance to the Midwest.
Yes, yes.
And without the river, Prescott probably would not be here.
No.
I mean,
Everybody that came into Pierce County came by boat in the old days.
there were no roads, it wasn't even surveyed, so they couldn't even buy any land. They came here and some of them were what you would call a claim jumper, I guess, but is it really claim jumping if the land isn't even surveyed? I mean, I think they would have bought it, but there was nobody to buy it from.
Yeah, that's about it.
You know, and you talk about the river pilots. In 1980, I gotta remember this, in 1983 or 84, there were 44 licensed Coast Guard river pilots living in the school district of Prescott. And that was the highest percentage in the nation.
Yeah,
And I was one of them, your son Charlie was one of them, John Welch, Dennis Eaton, the 5 Schickling brothers. As you traveled around, everybody knew the Schickling brothers.
oh yeah.
And they knew all of they knew your husband and they knew your brother-in-laws, you know, because the influential, the Shealy workers and all this type of thing. So my grandmother cooked on the towboats.
Yeah.
And did Minnie Reichert cooked on the towboats. Donna Soden cooked on the towboats. My mother did in short shifts. When Grandma wanted off, she would call ahead, and Mom would meet her at Lock 2 in Hastings. Grandma would scamper up the ladder at being about 75 or whatever, and Mom would climb down, and Mom would ride into St. Paul and work on the crew, and then Grandma, taking care of her business or whatever, she would get back on the boat when it came back downriver, and she'd either get on at Red Wing or she would get on at Alma. Because I remember Mom doing that a couple times in the summer. So, and I also had 2 uncles who were deckhands, one who was killed on the river. So for me, it was my playground.
Yeah.
It was my occupation, as it was for you. Like you said, the beach was the place to be. Well, there was no television.
Yeah.
And there was no devices. Roads are an integral part of our community. The roads have changed dramatically. Talk to us a little bit about the roads coming into town. What roads and towns have changed and this type of thing?
Well, of course, the biggest change was when Highway Q, which went down along the river, was changed into State Highway 35. That was the biggest change. And the other change was when they built Highway 10 out to Ellsworth. There was a road there, but it wasn't a very good road. And all the sand that they used for building the road came out of the gravel pits near my house, which is now got condominiums all over it. But that's where they got all the sand from Highway 10 was from the gravel pit near our house.
That was our playground.
Yeah, that was the playground.
For the local neighborhood gang, wasn't it?
Yep.
Between the Harrises and the Beelers and the Eggers and the Travises and the Dodges and the Eichmanns
Yep.
and the Hansons and the Blakes on that end of town.
Oh, yes. Yep.
I can remember Bob Radke coming down there. Bob passed away this spring, early spring, and I remember him coming down there and spent a lot of time in that gravel pit.
Oh, yeah, they had forts all over the place.
How about the new roads that have gone in? Well, you haven't driven through our traffic circle much. I mean, we have a traffic circle in town now. I mean, Prescott's moving up in the world.
Oh, yes, unfortunately.
And we now have stoplights. We have 2.
Of course, there were no stoplights, hardly any street stop signs anyway. You could drive anytime you wanted to, any place you wanted to.
Now, in the 30s, were the roads blacktop or were they dirt?
Main Street was a dirt road for quite a while, but I don't remember that. I remember they were always blacktopped when I was, when I was a kid. This was in the 1940s, of course. But the roads were pretty well, they were pretty well used, and of course there weren't that many roads anyway. No road signs. You just went by whose house. Well, this is Eggers' house, so that's where you want to go on that road.
So you didn't give directions on GPS, you said, who do they live next to?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Everybody knew who it was, because everybody knew who lived in town.
Well, now, did they plow the roads in the wintertime? I know there were some towns that back in the 30s and early 40s, they didn't even plow because they didn't have enough cars to make it hardly worthwhile.
No, the old timers had told me that in the wintertime they just put up their cars. They didn't use them. They still use their sleighs. But I remember the streets all being plowed and everything.
Well, now Doc Laney had his medical sleigh that we have now at the History
Yes.
Center. And I know he did use that occasionally to provide medical care when doctors still came to your home.
But of course, he made calls out in the country too. You know, he was a great man because he would go to your house. In fact, when my first baby was born, Gail was out working on the river, and Dr. Laney was the one that came in his car in the middle of the night and brought me over to the hospital.
He patched me up more than once. I have a few scars here and there that he stitched up.
Yeah.
And the sleigh that we have down there now, Bill remembers riding in it, Dr. Bill Laney, who is Doc's son, and it was given to the History Center by Bill Nork and his wife, and his daughter and son-in-law. So we have to thank the Nork and the Hanson families for the beautiful sleigh that we have.
Yes.
Tragedies. Tragedies are always part of towns and lives. What do you remember for tragedies?
I guess I don't remember. I know one young man, he must have been in 8th grade or high school. He did commit suicide, but that was something unheard of. That was one of the biggest tragedies that I think we all remember as kids. And I don't remember any really tragedies as such. There were sudden deaths or deaths, you know, by accident.
What do you know about the French boys in the ice?
Yes. And they both drowned in the river in the middle of the winter. They wandered down, and of course they were playing down by the river. And I remember that it was in the winter time, and everybody in town, the whole fire department, spent the whole night looking for those kids. They didn't know exactly where they were, whether they were in the river or wandered away on the land someplace. But eventually they found them, and that was one of the real tragedies, the little French boys.
Because well, there have been a few people drowned at our beach.
Oh, yeah.
I was involved with a couple of them.
Yeah.
I want to say Verna Wolf's son.
Yeah, Donald Wolf.
Yes, that's Donald. I didn't know it was.
And he was in school someplace, I don't know. He wasn't very old, I don't think.
Well,
And,
the story is that he went down and they were looking for him, and they found him clenching the chain that held the weights that held it in place.
yes.
Oh, jeez. And then Gary Van Gorder.
Oh, I've forgotten all
Would have been,
about
what,
that.
about
Yeah.
1972 or 73 in there. I remember that very well because I was involved in it. I think there was another drowning down there, when a young lady named Patty Morris.
I don't remember that.
They lived over behind you. Kenny was her younger brother, and she was a nurse at the, what do you call it, the state hospital in Hastings, and they would come over to the beach and bring their patients over to swim before the beach opened.
Oh,
They would bring them about 10 or 11 in the morning, and then they would swim until noon or so.
yeah.
Well, sometime during that 10 to 12, one of them drowned, and I remember going down, and I was young, but I could swim like a fish. And so they had Ed Peterson and Chuck Hildebrandt and all of us young guys who were 13, 14, 15, they had us down there looking and doing human chaining. We did find them. So there have been a few drownings at our beach, but mostly it was a great place to spend time.
Yes.
How about funny stories? I mean, you always think about the funny stories of weird things that happen. Any stick out? Or do I got to let you think about that one and write that one down?
You know, Popeye Jr. was one of our town characters. He was in my class in school. And he and Harley Eaton got together one day, and they were going to build a plane that they could fly off one of the cliffs in town. Well, it got up about 2 feet in the air and came down again. But they were always up to something. And of course, they both grew into well-respected people. Gene was one of the pilots on the excursion boats on the Mississippi, and Harley had a long-time business in town. But they did a lot of goofy stuff when they were kids.
Well, Popeye, as I traveled around the country working on the waters, he was known everywhere. And he was known, him and the Shooklins, they were known as master pilots. Not just a pilot, they were, you mentioned he was a pilot of the Delta Queen, he piloted the American Queen, he piloted the Calypso for Jacques Cousteau and this type of thing. And so it was interesting as I traveled around the river system. They'd always ask, do you know that Tronier guy, or do you know the Schicklings and this type of thing? So even in New Orleans, if you mentioned you were from Prescott, they knew people from Prescott.
Well, you know, one of the biggest things at Halloween was to tip over. Everybody had outdoor toilets. We didn't have running water for a long time. And everybody, they'd always tip over the toilets on Halloween. That was a big deal. So Ollie Tronier one year, he was Popeye's father, and he was a character himself. He he moved the toilet ahead about 5 feet, and they went to tip over the toilet, and they fell in. And everybody thought, well, good for them. They deserved it.
Yeah, I think the punishment fit the crime.
Yeah.
Nobody got hurt, but it was worth a laugh.
And Ollie Tronier was one of the people that really helped me with that book, because he could remember, grew up in town, he could remember all kinds of things, and he worked on the old railroads, on the steam railroads, and I had talked to him many times about Prescott history, and he was one of the other people that was really helpful in recalling things. So he was a great help to me also, and I had a lot of fun with Ollie.
Well, you know, every town has characters. What do you remember for characters?
Well, Ollie was one of them.
Ollie was one, you bet.
He was one character.
I knew him.
Everybody knew who he was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Hank Elhorn was another one. He was a bachelor, a single guy, but he always walked around through town and mowed lawns for 25 cents. And his house, after he died, his house burned, and the firemen started looking around, and there were dollar bills floating all over the place. And they collected them all up and gave them to one of his relatives that showed up. But he was another character. And I remember one time my son Ed was trying to start the lawnmower, and he couldn't get it started. And Hank walked by and didn't say a word. He went up in the yard, started up the lawnmower, didn't say a word, just left.
I remember Hank Wells, having lived in the neighborhood out there. And my dad would hire him to do odd jobs and this type of thing when they owned a restaurant and that type of thing. And Hank lived until the 80s, late 80s, because I had a picnic table, and he knew me, that I was Don's son.
Yeah.
And it took him about 40 years to figure out my name was really Dallas. And he didn't talk much. But he would always stop in my yard and sit on my picnic table to rest on the way home.
Oh.
So my kids got to know Mr. Elhorn.
Yeah.
And I still remember Danny going up, my daughter, going up and say, "Hi, Mr. Elhorn." And, you know, he was a character, but in a good way.
Yes.
But who else? There were some more.
Casey Jones, he
Oh.
was always another one. He was always downtown. You know, you could see Casey downtown any hour of the day or night. I don't know if he ever had a job or anything.
He painted houses.
Oh, he did.
And he painted inside, I know that.
Yeah, I didn't know what he did.
My grandmother hired him to paint, that's why I saw that.
Yeah.
And didn't he smoke a pipe?
I don't know, he could have.
And he was the guy who did the river level readings every day. He would go down twice a day and check and then he would send that information to some place or other, I'm
Yeah.
not sure where.
Well, before that, Elizabeth Atchison, who lived next to the water gauge.
Okay.
And when I remember the reading, she was the one that read the gauge every day and sent in the readings.
I remember Eddie Johnson. He came from River Falls and ended up living here for a long time. Master fisherman. Master fisherman.
Yeah.
How about Charlie Staff?
Well, I didn't know Charlie Staff. I didn't know much about him,
Okay.
except that he had started the fishing company,
Okay.
or the lure company.
But, well, you've been around here for a while.
91 years.
91 years. So in the future, what do you see for Prescott's future? What project would you like to see? What would you like to see come to reality?
Well, the best thing I ever think ever happened in recent years was the Freedom Park. It's a wonderful place, and it has drawn people from all over the world, in fact. And I think that's one of the best things that ever happened to Prescott. And if the Cotter family, not my Cotter family, a different one, hadn't sold that, it would have been just full of homes. And I think the other best thing that happened is when they built the cemetery, when they built Pine Glen Cemetery in 1856, instead of a cemetery there where everybody could come and enjoy looking at the river and everything, that would have been plumb full of homes too. So two of the best spots, and the worst thing that I ever had that in my days was building the big condominium downtown on the river. Every town you go to along the river has a park along the river, has beautiful views of the river, and what do we have? A huge condominium down there. And I was really disappointed when that went through because I thought they're losing a wonderful waterfront area. But that was just my own opinion. Of course, it brought more tax money into the town.
Well, it was also the opinion of a guy named Mark Twain.
Yeah.
That when you came up and saw that little sandstone bluff, that he knew he was at Prescott, at the mouth of the St. Croix. So, I mean, that was a famous spot in the nation. And
it certainly was.
how about the old International Order of Oddfellows Hall location, which is was the old steamboat lot.
Yeah, and that's the other place. Right now, it's just a vacant lot, but there have been a proposal to have a big condominium down there too, and I don't know, gets stalled up at City Hall, I think, for a couple of years already. So I hope that would eventually get turned to somewhere where people could sit and look at that beautiful St. Croix River.
And it would be a natural addition to the bike trail coming out of Minnesota.
Yes. That's the other thing. We have a bike trail now that goes out to what they call McGee Park, and that was one place where us kids always used to go out and just have fun out at McGee Park. And those big old pine trees that are there came over from Germany with the Most family, and they have been standing ever since. So they're got a real history. They're from the original trees were from Germany.
That pine, the pine grove that sits
They
on.
still call it the pine woods.
Oh. I mean, I was in there I don't know how many times as a kid. The whole ground was covered with needles, and it always had a quiet, soft feel in it. I didn't realize that they came over with the Most from Germany.
Oh yes,
Oh,
Mrs.
wow.
Most. I interviewed Mrs. Most one time, and she said they brought them over from Germany. And she's the same lady that when she told me when she went to first grade, she sat outside the door and cried because she only spoke German.
Oh.
And that's one thing I liked about working at the Journal. You didn't have to get news every week. Bruce Harper said, you can go out and just interview people if you want to. And I interviewed many, many people in town, and that's where I learned a lot of things about Prescott too. And I was always grateful that Bruce Harper was the one I worked for down at the Journal because he gave me a free rein to do just about everything. And a couple times people threatened to sue the Journal for, and his dad, Fran Harper, was the editor, and he said, well, if you're going to sue us, get in line.
Well, Mary, I think we're going to wrap it up for today. We're going to do this again, but I've been interviewing Mary Beeler. She has been a Prescott resident for about 87 years.
Right.
And still doing well at 91. She is my historical member. One thing I didn't ask you, Mary, when did the Prescott Area Historical Society start? Late 1940s?
Yes. In fact, my mother was one of the people that started, and Dorothy Eaton's mother was another one. Those two were friends for a long time, and now their daughters are friends for a long time. But it's been going, and then it dropped out for quite a while, and then it got restarted again. And it's very active.
Well, we're becoming more active.
Huh?
We're becoming more active.
Yes, yes.
And you and I do this all the time. Whenever we give a historical presentation, we always ask people, join the History Center. Join us, because people keep telling us that, well, that's just my family. Well, what they don't understand is their family is our history.
Right.
And Mary, this has been a hoot. I always enjoy it. And so this is Dallas Egger signing off from Prescott Area Historical Society, and I'd like to thank you to First National Bank of River Falls, the Prescott branch, for letting us use their beautiful basement to do our interview. See you later.
Okay, bye.